You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Presidential election 2020. Who can Catholics vote for? Welcome everyone to PolyPat. PolyPat is back, as I like to say. We got an interesting election, Pat. Donald Trump versus Joe Biden.
Do. Yeah, it's interesting, man. It's the most interesting political time of my lifetime, that's for sure. And even people who are, let's say, beyond my age have agreed with that. That there's never, at least again for them, been a time that is so just crazy. It's just crazy out there, man. It's absolutely bonkers. So I'm excited for this conversation. Yes. It's important to have these conversations. So yeah, let's dive in.
It's so interesting, talking about religion and politics. They say don't talk about those because those are the two things that blow things up. Like it just blows the conversation up. But that's exactly what we talk about on this podcast. So
religion and politics, yeah. But it's also the two things that, at the end of the day, people are most interested in and passionate about. That's why it blows things up, right? If I'm sitting here just talking about like mathematics and algebra, okay, yeah, that's fine. That's interesting, but it doesn't usually like devolve into, fisticuffs as some of these other conversations do. Mm-hmm. Because, what ultimate bearing does that have on your life at the end of the day? Politics is the affairs of men. So political philosophy is extremely important, and it has enormous consequences in our everyday life. Same thing with religion. Religion impresses upon the most fundamental questions of life, questions of origin, meaning, morality, destiny, identity. And again, how you answer those questions and whether you think those questions can be answered has enormous implications for how you see the world and how you live your life as well. So it's not surprising that people get passionate about this stuff because so much hinges on these topics. But that's, I think Chesterton has a quote where he says something like, I won't talk anything but religion and politics because there's nothing else to talk about. Right.
Wow.
There's something to that, man. There's something to that. Right. And apparently Aquinas was the same way. I don't know how true this is. This is kind of hearsay, but apparently if Aquinas was in a conversation and it shifted away from any like important matters of theology or philosophy, he would just excuse himself. Just didn't have time for anything else, right? Yeah, right. Wow. Yeah, and there's something, obviously there's a lot of things in life that I care about and like to talk about that aren't religion or politics. But I sympathize with Chesterton and maybe Aquinas. Again, I don't know if that's true with Aquinas. I kind of like to think that it's true. It's one of those fun, maybe legendary things that you almost hope is true. But anyway. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think we have lots to talk about. I think there's lots of interesting questions to ask. And I think the first question is stated simply, how I said at the beginning of the podcast: can a Catholic vote for a Democrat? And the reason why we're asking that question instead of can a Catholic vote for a Republican is because of the issue of abortion, ultimately.
Right.
Can a Catholic vote for a Democrat? I mean, there's a lot of issues with the Democrat Party and the platform and everything. But this is a question that Father Altman released a video like a month and a half ago that went viral. It's, I think, almost 1 million views now on YouTube. And he basically just clearly said no. Now, there's nothing in the catechism or in church councils that say you cannot vote for a Democrat. But there are principles that they're outlined to where it's pretty much like a clear choice. But there's a lot of confusion in the Catholic world.
Right.
And I think part of the confusion is that we don't have, like, we have two candidates that are hard to grapple with. We could say that. Like, Trump rubs people the wrong way in a lot of ways. His personality, his bully tactics, a lot of those things can really just be disarming. And other people think that some of his policies dehumanize certain individuals and that he's not really pro-life. And other people claim he's the most pro-life president we've ever had. And so Trump is kind of an interesting figure. But when we look at the platforms of the parties, I think that's really what we have to look at as well. Even though we are voting for these people, we're also voting for the platform. So I wanted your initial comments on, can a Catholic vote for a Democrat? How would you answer that, Pat?
Yeah, I would say in the current situation, no. So yeah, like technically, I know people have criticized Altman and say, well, technically, yes, technically there is a hypothetical situation where Catholics could vote for Democrats. So let's imagine that, Biden, we still have the Biden and Harris ticket, which are they're radically pro-abortion. Let's not beat around the bush. They absolutely are. They're, arguably pro-infanticide as well. And a lot of the Catholics I've seen who defend them, they don't try and argue against that. They'll try and make other moves that we can address of how you could still vote for a Biden-Harris ticket. But of course, there is a hypothetical situation where you could still vote for that. I mean, imagine that the Republican candidate was also pro-abortion, but they were pro-abortion and like anti-religious liberty, right? So then you could technically, if you decide that you're going to vote, you could vote for the Biden-Harris ticket, but only with the intention to subvert or thwart the greater evil that would come about from the opposing ticket, right? Which is same level of evil on abortion, but even more because they're anti-religious liberty. So granted, there are hypothetical situations, and we can talk about the doctrine of double effect and how your intentions have to be aligned on preventing the extreme evil, not promoting the evil, on preventing the more extreme evil, not promoting the evil that you are voting for, right? That's really important. Yeah. But that's not the world we live in. That's why Father Altman's video, I would argue, even though missing some, technical qualifications, was refreshing in its directness, and Catholics need to hear that directness. I think there's been a failure of leadership to call out what is the most repugnant evil that our society is currently facing, an evil that is as evil, if not worse, than the evils of slavery, than the Holocaust, that I pray we will look back on with as much shame and disgust on our country because of the horrors of abortion that we now look back on with slavery. I've talked about this before, right? This phenomena of motivated reasoning. And it's funny because people throw out a thought experiment and they ask, well, how do you, in our current time, how do you think you would have acted if you lived in the time of slavery? And the answer is, I don't know. I didn't live back then. But you can test that now because there is a moral atrocity that is so grave that is happening right now that you can know how you would act in the face of a moral atrocity, and that is abortion. And there's this phenomena that's well studied in psychological research called motivated reasoning that looks into essentially the question of how is it that people just weren't clear on the slavery issue? I mean, it seems so obvious now that this was such a moral catastrophe. Why was it that people defended slavery? They had this moral blind spot. And motivated reasoning says, well, there's all these different mechanisms, right, that kind of kick in: differential stopping, selective memory use that people use because they want to see themselves as good people. They want to see their friends and family members as good people. So they will blind themselves morally to certain catastrophes just to avoid consequences that they don't like, right? And I would argue that it's very interesting because we look back on other cultures and we diagnose them as suffering from motivated reasoning. But what we need to do is ask, are we suffering from that now, right now? And there's no reason to think that we wouldn't be. It's not like there's some big change in human nature from the time of slavery, the Holocaust, and now that makes it so we would no longer be susceptible to that. Of course we are. And the morally egregious blind spot that's happening right now is abortion. Abortion is murder. It is the intentional killing of an innocent human life. Now, when it comes, and cut me off at any time if I'm rambling too much here, Eric, but when it comes to government, what should government do? This is basic political philosophy. Hobbes and Locke talk about this, right? You imagine what it would be like in a state of kind of brutish nature, and what sort of terribleness about that would make you want to give up some of your liberties to essentially have an authority over you, right? And this is the thought experiment to help kind of establish a floor of what is essential to government, that if government doesn't at least do this much, then we'd rather live without it, right? We'd rather not have government. And then we can talk about floors and ceilings, because what we want to establish is that there's a certain floor, that if the government is not providing this floor, it is failing as a government, right? And there are certain ceilings that we don't want to go beyond for reasons that maybe the government isn't the best thing to take care of that. And there's also other targets that maybe the government could or perhaps should reach for, but it's not essential to the government, right? Like maybe the government could do this, but if it doesn't mean that we'd rather live without a government, for example. Why am I drawing this out? Well, here's a move that people will make between abortion and healthcare. They'll say, well, Trump isn't pro-universal healthcare, therefore he's not pro-life. But healthcare isn't a floor of the government. But the protection of our inherent rights, the most fundamental of which is the right to life, is a floor of the government, right? That if the government is not only failing to uphold our right to life, but promoting policies that actively infringe and violate that right to life, we have an abysmal failure of government. That's why we call governments such as Nazi Germany evil, right? They're evil because they're impinging upon the very thing that at the most basic level a government should do, which is sort of a negative consideration of the common good. So a common good can be considered both negatively and positively. Negatively would concern all those things the government is just kind of meant to make sure don't get interfered with, right? Like your right to life, that you don't get stabbed through the head when you're in your mother's womb, for example, or that you don't get, mugged or killed when you're out in the street, or if you do, that there's justice that's brought to bear to prohibit those things, that your basic rights to property and stuff like that are protected. That's the negative consideration of the common good. Then there's positive considerations of the common good, and that's where there's actually a huge amount of debate on degrees of like how much should the government provide for things like education and healthcare and stuff like that. And this is where it's not as cut and dry as something like the right to life issue. Like the right to life issue is cut and dry. Abortion is murder. There's no matter of degree there, right? You either have the right to life and the government has a duty to uphold that, or you don't, right? When it comes to healthcare, you can make prudential arguments and say, okay, maybe the government could assist in healthcare, but there's also reasons to think that the government would do an inadequate job with that. Maybe it should subsidize some aspects, but not take over the whole thing. Most people agree. Like, I've never met a person that thinks that we shouldn't try and get the best healthcare to the most number of people possible. I've never met anybody who thinks that shouldn't be a goal, right? What is disagreed upon are the means to that end. And that is where people in good conscience and with good moral understanding can have significant disagreement on what the best means are, whether we should have a market-based approach, a bureaucratic approach, or some mix of the two. Right. So it's just not a useful analogy to say that somebody isn't pro-life because they're not pro-universal healthcare. The analogy breaks down completely, and it betrays a fundamental lack of understanding of political philosophy and what the nature of the state and what the nature of the government is meant to provide. So you can kind of see where I'm going with this, right? That abortion is such a fundamental infringement on such a fundamental right that any government that is not outlawing abortion and is not upholding that fundamental right to life is a severely defective, if not evil, government, right? It is failing to uphold the basic minimum thing that the government that makes us want to give up some of our liberties to not just be in a state of nature or anarchy, to have authority over us because those things are worth protecting. So those are just some initial remarks. I'm sure we'll go a lot further with it.
Yeah, and I think that's a common thing that I'm seeing. I posted on Facebook a few weeks ago about the first presidential debate and how I was very saddened by Trump's behavior. And I am kind of a reluctantly voting Republican, but I feel like I have a moral obligation to do so because of the issue of abortion, because it carries more moral weight. And a lot of people were very confused by that. And I think a lot of my liberal friends don't really understand how weighty that issue is. And I think a common flaw among Catholics that maybe lean towards the left is that they don't take into account the church's teaching on the hierarchy of morality and like the hierarchy of moral weight. And so the reason why the fundamental right to life is so important is because if you don't have a right to life, you don't have any rights. So if someone is a racist, wanting to enslave people, obviously those things are not good. But those people have life. And so if you take away, if you're claiming not to be racist, but you're already cutting people off from their life, then you're doing something even worse than racism because you're abolishing a race. And so there was this
Right.
one of the girls on the Facebook thread posted this article by Jeannie McGaffigan, the wife of Jim McGaffigan, this like funny comedian. But anyway, she was talking about how she's Catholic and she's voting Democrat because she feels like Biden and his policies are more holistically pro-life, even though they're pro-choice with the babies in the womb, but they take care of the environment. They're not racist policies and all of these things and all these things. And I just kept thinking, but she doesn't understand the fundamental right to life. And that if you don't have that, all the other things that Biden says or does, it's like it's colored by that one thing. And also we talked about this before, that systemic racism, if there's ever a great example of that, it would be Planned Parenthood. And so it's like, okay.
Exhibit A.
And I agree with her that like we need to take care of all of life from conception to natural death.
Right.
Like it's all human life. As Catholics, we're called not to be racist. We're called to value human life in every condition, every state, to love every single person. But if you take away the right of the most innocent among us, then that colors your whole campaign. So like for me, the way I think about it too is, okay, if Biden is propagating these policies that really are saying we're helping the poor, we're helping these people, how can I trust you? How can I believe in you when in fact you don't care about the most innocent among us?
Right. So yeah, a whole bunch of thoughts on this. And to me, it's a whole bunch of mental gymnastics and contortions that just do not get at the fundamental issue. First off, abortion murders hundreds of thousands a year, across the world. It's probably even more than that. I forget the worldly statistics, but it's an obscene number of death, right? It's an obscene number of deaths every year. There are racists in America, like legitimate racists. But the moral proportionality of people who commit hate crimes that end up killing somebody in America, racist, bigoted hate crimes, is nothing compared to the moral abomination of abortion right now. Plus, the way that racism is used in current context is really it's been redefined, right? So to be racist for many people on the left is just to participate in a system that produces disparities, right? And it's a slippery thing because we can see how racism would lead to disparities, but it's a pretty well known logical fallacy, to say that just because there's disparities that you have racism, right? That doesn't work, right? So even though racism can lead to disparities, just because you have disparities, it doesn't mean that it's from racism. What's the underlying reasoning for that? Well, it's because some effects can have multiple causes, right? Some effects can have multiple causes. So not all disparities are the result of racism. But you made up a good point where we have some disparities that we can certainly link to historical situations that were undeniably bigoted, and Planned Parenthood is the gigantic elephant in the room. Now, people want to argue whether or not Sanger was racist. I don't know, but she was definitely bigoted. She was definitely ableist. She was definitely bigoted towards lower classes. And there's no doubt that bigotry spilled over onto minority communities, especially the African-American communities, and that the systemic generational effect of that is felt significantly today. We know that abortion disproportionately impacts minority communities. We know. So like, if you want to address systemic racism, and I do, I'm 100% in agreement with that, but we have to look at the right examples and we have to think clearly on this. I will stand side by side with you as we work to shut down Planned Parenthood. Absolutely. It is systemically hugely an issue. So you're right. And getting back to the right to life issue, we have to differentiate between rights that are intrinsic versus instrumental. People will want to defend abortion because, well, I have a right to privacy. I have a right to my property. Yes, you do. But these are instrumental rights. And the only reason that these rights have any value is because they attach to something that is intrinsically valuable. They derive value because of the inherent worth that you have as a human being, and the moral shields that rights serve as a moral shield, right? So that way you can pursue your ultimate end and your flourishing. That's what rights are meant to do. So you can't use these moral shields as a moral sword to kill somebody, right? It's fundamentally perverse. You're taking the instrumental rights of saying, I can kill a human being because I have a right to property, to subvert or undermine the intrinsic right that gives any of those rights any value whatsoever. It's ass backwards. You're not thinking straight. There's a clear hierarchy to rights. If we do not boldly protect and affirm that right to life, then we don't have any other rights.
Exactly.
Because they don't attach or derive value from anything else. So it's just important to get that clear. And a lot of people just do not have that clear at all.
And to me, when someone like Kamala Harris last night talking about how we've had 200,000 deaths due to the coronavirus so far this year and how awful this administration is because of all those deaths. I mean, look at that. I keep thinking, but you support abortion. And, in the first, I saw a statistic in the first 3 months or so, 4 months of this year, 10.5 million babies have been slaughtered across the world because of abortion. And at that time, there was 500,000 cases of coronavirus deaths worldwide. So at the same time that there was 500,000 deaths from the coronavirus worldwide, which shut down everything, there was 10.5 million deaths of babies. And so and so when you support abortion like Harris does or Biden does, every word that they say to me rings hollow. It's just like, I'm sorry, but you don't, I don't trust you. But people can flip that on me and say, well, look at the way Trump has treated his opponents and shutting them down, and look at the way he treats other people and the way he treats women. He's had a lot of bad things that happened in the past and words that he said that's very demeaning and degrading. So how can you trust him? Or they'll call out some of his things that he said and said, listen, he lied about that. The administration lied about wearing masks and these sorts of things and whatever the case might be. And okay, so that's fair enough. But when you look at what has he actually done as far as the policies, and it seems like there's a few things that have gone well as far as appointing pro-life justices. Hopefully that Barrett lady becomes a Supreme Court justice. Planned Parenthood, I know, absolutely hates Trump. So that's a good signal to me because they've lost a lot of funding from Trump. Now, one comment that was interesting, though, on my Facebook thread.
Well, can I chime in real quick for one thing? Because there's a lot of red herrings, and politicians are great at this, and so are people on Facebook debates. And they'll say, well, look, Trump is inconsistent. That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because for two reasons. One is somebody could offer an argument against abortion and live inconsistently with their principles on human dignity, and that has nothing to do on the truth of that argument, right? Hitler could offer an argument against abortion, and just the fact that he's Hitler wouldn't show that the argument is false, right?
Yeah.
Right. Either abortion is murder or it's not, and putting it in the mouths of different people doesn't change the truth value of that argument. And I argue that it's true. Abortion is murder. Now, so you just have to be very careful on charges of hypocrisy or red herrings or ad hominems in a lot of these debates. And we have to keep the fundamental issue the fundamental issue. Is abortion murder? Is it an intrinsic violation of our most fundamental right? If it is, and especially if it's slaughtering as many people as Eric has cited here, which is even higher than what I remember last time I looked at the statistics, which is alarming. And not that they weren't already alarming. This is an evil so grotesque that we have to do everything we can to battle that. And of course, I don't like the way that you want your statesmen to be statesmen. You want them to be gentlemanly, but all politicians, Democrats, Republicans, and I don't want to say all, but so many of them are rats. They really are. If you're looking for somebody to be, a truthful, honest, upstanding person, we don't have that candidate right now. Joe Biden certainly isn't it. He's been lying since as long as he's been in politics. He might be a little bit more subtle about it or a little bit more polished. But, if you want to just compare, one checklist of lies to another, that's never going to end. And as you said, the second reason is we have to look at policies and practice and accomplishments, right? And at this point, Trump has demonstrated to me that I have decent evidence to think that he actually does care about the pro-life issue, and he's made substantial moves in a very positive direction for pro-life, especially with the court appointments. like you've said,
Mm-hmm.
and also culturally as well. He's very vocal. He's very pronounced about pro-life. Last I saw statistics is younger generations are becoming increasingly more pro-life. So there's both, he's made progress both politically in terms of appointments and other policies and culturally. And both of that is a win-win. So whatever his personal feeling, I can't peer into a man's soul. Like I just can't, right? I don't know if he really holds this deep in his heart or not. All I can do is look at the policies he publicly says he's going to champion and whether he's just paid lip service or made any tangible progress towards that. And what I know is he's publicly, very much stood up for the pro-life cause and in practice actually made tangible moves that have positively moved the needle for pro-lifers. And that's good. That's good.
Yeah, because it was interesting. Someone posted on response to my Facebook thread. Listen, Biden is pro-abortion with no restrictions. Trump is pro-abortion with regulations or with restrictions. And so he basically was like, the pro-life movement has failed. Like either way, they're both pro-abortion candidates. And I didn't know where that was coming from. I don't know if that's true necessarily. I mean, I think maybe Trump used to be pro-choice and switched. But I think that causes some people to say, like, are Republicans just using the pro-life platform to get votes, or do they actually mean it? Like, is it actually making a difference? And the biggest argument that I've seen on Facebook and what's coming my way and articles that people keep sending me are that under Democratic policies, abortions have decreased. Under Republicans, they've either stayed the same or increased, and they provide some data about that. And so what do we say about that, Pat? Like, okay, like we have a lot of friends that are also convicted about the pro-life thing, and they honestly think that voting Democrat in some way will help lessen abortions, which is the end goal.
It's a joke. I'm going to cut it off right now. So abortion has been trending somewhat down since about 1980, if you look up the stats. And we have to remember,
God.
like, it isn't just praise God, right? I mean, it's still horrifically high, horrifically high. So we have to remember that it isn't just a president who rules the country, right? There's been Democrat presidents and Republican Congress, Republican Senate. So it's just not that cut and dry, right, to parse this out. But let's grant it. Let's just grant it. Let's say that abortion does decrease whenever there's a president candidate. I want you to run a thought experiment with me and see if this would seem acceptable to anybody with a functioning prefrontal cortex. I don't think it is. Imagine that you had one candidate who was pro-slavery and another candidate that was anti-slavery. And the anti-slavery candidate said, look, we got it. This is so evil. We have to get rid of this. I don't care, if it drives us to a civil war. I don't want a civil war, but this is such an evil that we need to fight it and make sure this is blotted out from the face of the earth. And we have another candidate who says, well, no, hold on. Because look at this. Whenever we have a pro-slavery candidate in, slavery decreases 5%, 10%. See, isn't that good? We have a decrease in slavery when we have the pro-slavery candidate. I think most people immediately would see that is a ridiculous and evil statement. Something, even if you grant the position that you've had a decrease, and a decrease is far, 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 far from an obliteration or annihilation. And like slavery, abortion is not something that we should be hoping for a gradual decrease from. And look, there's no possible world that we think that this is going to be like a gradual increase down to the acceptable zero, which is zero at all.
Hey, your microphone is kind of tripping out right now.
Sorry, is that better?
Maybe plug it in again.
Let's see here.
It kind of was a little squirrely there. Can you?
How's that? Is that fixed?
That's great. Yeah.
All right, sweet.
So start over maybe a minute before your point, and
right. So gradual reductions are not eliminations, right? And there's no reason to expect that we would continue to gradually reduce abortion down to zero with Democrats. No, never. That would never happen, right? Because they're too hot on this issue of abortion, right? As a woman's right, which is a ridiculous euphemism. So what you say is, no, some evils are so terrible, so fantastically evil that the only appropriate response is to smash them out of existence as early as possible. And we actually look back at certain founding fathers of our country, Washington, for example, as having morally failed, because Washington from what we can tell, was somebody who towards the end of his life really did think that slavery was a bad thing, an evil thing, right? But he thought that we shouldn't try to abolish it because it might tear the Union apart. And we look back at him, at least most people do, and say that was the wrong call. Like, this was so bad, you should have sought to abolish it. But he didn't. Now, I'm not saying that this is a reason to go tear down his statues or anything. We have to give people, the cultural context that they were in. And the fact that he even got around through his own moral blindness of essentially growing up as a prince in this society in a time when virtually nobody would have questioned him about owning slaves, actually shows, I think, a high level of moral maturity, even if he didn't develop it as high as we would have liked him to, right? Mm-hmm. But what we think is that no, some evils are so fantastically horrific that you don't try to invoke a civil war. You don't want the negative consequences that will come from it. But the funny thing is Washington was right. He was right. Like, it did tear our Union apart when we tried to get rid of slavery. He was right. But people look back and say it was necessary. It was worth it. This was so evil. Yeah. And nobody would take the line seriously for a second, that if you just kept pro-slavery candidates in place, we'd have this gradual reduction. And we don't want a gradual reduction. Yeah. We want elimination now, because this is so terrible. I mean, or just run the thought experiment with the Holocaust, right? Oh, keep pro-Nazi candidates in, and less Jews will be exterminated every year. It'll be 10% less. But realistically, you would never get that down to zero because they're pro-Holocaust. Same thing with slavery. You would never get it down to zero because they're pro-slavery. So it's just obfuscatory chin pulling as far as I'm concerned. It's an incredibly weak and evil argument. It's evil. If you recognize abortion for what it is, you say, no, we need to get rid of this, and we need to get rid of it now, just like we would with the Holocaust, just like we would with slavery. Some issues are so repugnant that there just is no. It is black. Some issues in life really are black and white. They are. You're either going to have the moral clarity and conviction to call it for what it is, or you're not. But you need to be honest with yourself on this stuff. Mm-hmm.
And that's why, I think when you hear these arguments, it's a signal of, like, do they really understand the horrifying nature of abortion?
Right.
It seems like they're just excusing it as, it's bad, but, like, here's the deal. And it's like, whoa. It's real bad. It's murder. Like, it's the worst evil that's going on. Like, it's not just one among many sins. It's like the sin. Like, it is so evil. It is got the highest moral weight that is possible, killing an innocent human being. So when you really think about that, you have to filter everything through that. What I'm happy to see is people like Jeannie McGaffigan, who is still going to vote Democrat, I guess. At least she's trying to filter it through her Catholic faith, even though it's a little, I would say that there's a lot of formation that's missing. But she would still advocate for life in the womb. She just thinks that voting Democrat is the best way to preserve life in the long haul. Or I've heard that from another friend, where it's like the Trump effect of division and divisiveness, and like what's happening all over the country is so bad that, like, the backlash against his effect could be way worse for abortion than it could cause
that's a weak argument. Politics is divisive by nature. When people call Trump divisive, they don't understand what politics is. Governance is picking winners and losers. That's always divisive, always. So just calling something anybody who's pro-abortion is incredibly divisive. That's offensive to me, right? It's deeply offensive. So just calling someone divisive is just, I'm sorry. It's just
and the sin of division is not as great as the sin of murdering an innocent human being. So if we had to go, like, I'm not promoting civil war, but, like, it's like, at what cost to end abortion? Like, it's already innocent lives are daily being slaughtered. It needs to end. Now we need to end it through the right means. We can't do an evil means to justify a good end. Which is actually something I want to bring up, because a lot of times they'll say, well, Democrat policies are better for mitigating abortion, and they often point to the use of, and the Democrat Party wants the widespread and free distribution of contraceptives. And so I had to point out to one of my friends on Facebook, like, listen, this is also repugnant to me because as a Catholic, I'm against contraception. It is intrinsically vicious, as Pope Pius XI said. It is evil. Contraception is evil. And so if you're using an evil means like contraception to decrease abortions, you're wrong. Because you never want to use an evil means to get to even a good end, like ending abortion.
Yeah.
And so that also shows like, hey, your argument is actually doing worse. Like you're not persuading me to become Democrat right now because you're like, and they promote contraception, which is another grave evil. It's okay.
Especially for Catholics. Like Catholic teaching is clear. Like if you're not Catholic and like that's fine. You're just in a different category. We can have a different discussion, right? About and you can, I think, provide very robust philosophical arguments from traditional natural law of why contraception again, is immoral, right? Because it's frustrating the natural good end of our sexual faculties, right? And we're taking it's actually somewhat akin to like bulimia in a sense, where we're frustrating the end of the faculty and just trying to derive pleasure from it, which increases our sexual viciousness. And then you have all this sort of promiscuity, and people don't understand what sex is and what relationships are. And then it's not, abortion didn't come out of a vacuum, right? We've had a lot of undermining of sexual morality from progressives for a while that creates a culture that it inevitably tends towards abortion, and contraception is a big part of that. So the argument of the Democrats promote more contraception for a Catholic should be an absolute non-starter. Absolute non-starter. And we are talking to the Catholics here. So if you're not a Catholic, we just need to have a different conversation. But for a Catholic, that's ridiculous, right? The church is very clear on abortion, on sexual ethics. This is not like gray area at all, nor should it be. And in terms of other policies, let's be honest, like abortion isn't the only issue of the Democrats. They are immensely anti-religious liberty. So again, talking about floors and ceilings, right? People having the negative right to pursue in good conscience their worship of God. What has Biden promised? What has he done before? He's always been anti-religious liberty, but he's promised to force contraception back on nuns again, right? Kamala Harris is a huge anti-Catholic bigot.
Biden says he's an Irish Catholic. What do we make of this?
Yeah, what can you make of nonsense? I don't know. You can't make anything of nonsense. The man is a hypocrite, right? So you can say that Trump's a hypocrite as well, fine. But Biden is a worse hypocrite for Catholics because he wants to pander to the Catholic base while fundamentally either ignoring or being unaware of very obvious, very clear Catholic social teaching, right? And that's bad. That's bad because it means, like, I just don't think that he can be that ignorant, right? So that means he's either intentionally promoting something that he knows is evil, which is not good, or he just doesn't believe the faith. He just doesn't believe it, right? Neither of those are good options. Kamala Harris made it very clear that essentially if you are a member of the Knights of Columbus, you are not fit for public office. And what does that mean?
Wow.
What does that mean? It means that if you're a member of the Knights of Columbus, it just means that you believe what the Catholic Church teaches. So she's really just saying if you are a Catholic, in good standing with the Church, an Orthodox Catholic, that you're not fit for public office. So these people are not only radical on abortion, and I don't even like to say radical on abortion because it's not like it's a matter of degree. Abortion just is murder. That's it. End of story, right? So it's I hesitate to even use the term radical because it just is what it is, right? Mm-hmm. But they're also terrible on religious liberty. And then if you want to talk about like economic stuff, that's again where people in good conscience can disagree. But here's the thing. If you want improved economic circumstances, Trump has had a great track record, especially for unemployment among minority communities, which is fantastic. These should be things that we're celebrating. So it wouldn't even be immediately convincing to say that you would have improved democratic outcomes that might lessen abortion, because we can compare. Biden was part of the previous administration, right? And we can compare economic outcomes as well. But all that is secondary and somewhat beside the point because economic considerations don't override fundamental moral principles. So even if that wasn't the case, it wouldn't matter. But as it happens, Trump has had profoundly positive impact on helping those economically who are in minority categories. So I don't even see any way, even if it could bear in on the moral questions, which economic considerations don't, right? Or at least can't override the moral considerations. I just don't see the case. I just don't see the case at all.
Yeah.
Trump has had substantial success economically, aside from the pandemic, but that's an exception case, right? That's not like a financial crisis or something like that. That's a medical crisis. And we're already seeing a better than expected rebound economically as well. Mm-hmm.
And I remember Biden saying years ago when he was running for vice president with Obama, he said in an interview, I'm personally against abortion, but like I'm supporting these policies or whatever, but I'm personally against it. There's several things wrong with that. First of all, the Catholic Church teaches, this is from Pope John Paul II in Evangelii Vitae, paragraph 73, in the case of an intrinsically unjust law, such as a law permitting abortion or euthanasia, it is therefore never licit to obey it or to take part in a propaganda campaign in favor of such a law or vote for it. So if he's voted for a pro-abortion law, which he has, I believe, right? He wants to repeal the Hyde Amendment. That's one thing, so that federal funding for Planned Parenthood can continue, I guess, is my understanding of that. I might be off on my facts there, so you can check me on that.
He's been very public that he supports abortion. He
supports abortion, but so when someone says, but I'm personally against it, like that shouts hypocrisy too. Like, well, why are you against it? Because it's the murdering of innocent life. Well, then why are you promoting these policies that are for it? Right. And it's like, does not make sense. It's like saying, well, I'm personally against slavery, but I'm pro,
but I don't want to impose my will on other people.
Like,
well, what do you think government is? It's imposing certain people's will on other people. That's what government does. That's what it does, right?
Right.
That's what people just are so ignorant. And I hate to be, overly forceful with language, but stop being stupid. This is the nature of political philosophy in the state and the government. It is coercive. That's what it is. And when we vote for people, we are voting to have a certain will imposed upon other people in certain degrees. That's it. That's the nature of it.
Yes.
And then the question is, well, what are the impositions that we actually want? What are the right impositions?
What's the right will to have?
What is the right will to have? What are the right restrictions to have? What is the common good, negatively considered and positively considered? So you get all these stupid slogans that I guess to some people they sound good superficially. They've never sounded good superficially to me. They've always sounded stupid superficially. But as soon as you begin to unpack them, like you said, it's like, yeah, that makes no sense at all. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. But yeah, I know that was Biden's claim a while back. Yeah, it's absurd. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. And obviously, some people will say, well, I'm going to vote against abortion policies because that's what that text is talking about, is like when you vote for a certain policy. So like here in Colorado, I'm just going to advocate for this right now. Vote yes on Proposition 115. Vote yes to end late-term abortion. We're one of 9 states that you can basically abort up till 9 months, which is awful. It's horrific. And so if you vote yes on Proposition 115, we can end late-term abortion here in Colorado. So go do that. But some people will say, like, yes, I'm always going to vote against abortion in my policies. But if I vote for a politician that sometimes votes yes for those things or no, that's different than voting directly yes or no on abortion policies. So, for instance, I could vote yes on this Proposition 115 to end late-term abortion, but let's say I somehow justify supporting Biden, who he would vote no on that, but I'm supporting him because overall his campaign is more pro-life. Maybe he's against euthanasia, but Trump isn't, or these other things. So it's like a mixed bag. And so you think that, and it's going back to the same argument I said before, but people sometimes justify that of like, well, I'm just going to always vote against abortion in my local politics. But because presidents don't have too much sway, and because overall I think this is more pro-life, it's more pro-whole person, then I'm swinging that way. So I don't know if you have any comments about
just to reiterate what we've said predominantly is you just don't have sufficient moral clarity on how overriding of a moral issue abortion is. Not everything merits a single issue vote. And abortion isn't just a single issue. It's a defining issue.
Right.
And I want to be clear about
everything.
It colors absolutely everything. And if you have sufficient moral clarity and you see this evil for what it is, then you have to recognize that this is something that deserves your full attention to combat at every opportunity that you possibly can. great. I want you. Everybody should support pro-life positions locally, but you're never going to have a good in principle argument to support a Joe Biden ticket as a Catholic. It doesn't work. You just, for all the reasons we've already said, you would just be inconsistent with yourself at that point.
Yeah. Wow, Pat. Well, any further comments about politics, election, encouraging our listeners and no,
I want to encourage people to man up. Even if you're a woman, I get it. Trump is crass. Okay, he's crass. I don't like the way he speaks sometimes either. I certainly don't like the way many Democrats speak. Right? They're just more polished in their lies. There's a number of things I don't like about Trump. There's a number of things I don't like about his policy. I'm not a Trump fanboy. As Catholics, we should feel very uncomfortable with the general political landscape of America these days, right? However, you need to man up and just swallow hard on whatever your personal feelings about Trump's personality may be. Recognize how horrific of an evil abortion is and understand that you need to do everything that you can to combat this evil right now. And I don't know what else more to say about that. And that these contortions and these gymnastics about other policies, first off, I think that they're generally wrong when you analyze them piecemeal, but they don't override the moral significance and the moral weight that the abortion issue has. So I'm very confident in saying as a Catholic, no, you cannot vote for Joe Biden. In the current circumstances, you cannot vote in good conscience for Joe Biden. Even if there are hypothetical scenarios where you could, that isn't the actual world. That's not the world we're living in. Maybe you can make a case to refrain from voting or something like that. That's a separate issue. We could talk about that. But if you already decided you are going to vote, then yeah, that's my position.
Yeah, and I think just to encourage the listeners, if you're Catholic, filter everything through the Catholic lens. Like, that's your identity. You are a child of God, and you are a son or daughter of the Catholic Church, who is your mother. And, so filter everything through that lens, and then before the lens of an identity with a certain party. So before you're just like, I'm a Republican and I'm going to make my Catholic, beliefs fit in that, or I'm a Democrat, so I'm going to somehow contort my Catholic beliefs to fit that. No, you're a Catholic first, and let that color everything. And the Catholic Church is very clear on the fundamental right to life. And that is the weightiest issue. It colors everything. And so let that be a very clear marker. The popes that have gone before us are very clear on this. The Council, the Second Vatican Council, explicitly talks about needing the abolition of abortion and euthanasia. And so the Church is clear on abortion. It's an issue that is so egregious that it must be stopped. And so we need to promote a culture of life. And that's what I would say about it. So I would say, because of this, I don't think you can in good conscience vote for a Democrat. I can see all these arguments and how you can somehow justify it. But I think there's just so much clarity on this one issue that...
And one other quick thing, because people will say, well, I'm a Catholic and I'm voting for Biden and my conscience is clear. Maybe so, but it's not formed. Catholics have an obligation. Conscience. Yeah. It's a fault. Yeah. You have to form your conscience as well. That is a moral obligation. So I just want to put that in there.
Exactly. So I would say, like, kind of where I land on this is, like, you can't vote Democrat, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have to vote for Trump. You could vote third party. Or, there's, I don't remember which document this was in, but we do have a duty and an obligation to vote if we can. So I don't think restraining from voting at all is the solution, because I think as Catholics, we are under a certain moral obligation to vote. And so then you have to think, well, what is the most effective way to end abortion? What would be the most effective way to propagate this culture of life? And let that be your lens to look at the landscape. But I think that definitely makes a clear demarcation line where you can't vote Democrat. And so then you're left with either third party or Trump. And then you have to kind of make the decision from there.
And look, don't just vote, right? Because we know statistically your single vote is just it's not going to make a difference. Like, it's not, right? Now, I'm not saying don't go vote, because maybe this podcast will go viral and hundreds of thousands of people will hear it, and that could make a difference, right? So I just want to be clear about that. However, I mean, use your voice. And you can go and you can blast Trump up and down on any issues you want, but then you can and still should say, but I'm voting for him because of the right to life, because of the abortion issue.
Yep.
And that would be fine. I would have no problem with that. If you're a Catholic and you want to blast Trump on any number of points you disagree with, but then say the abortion issue is too big to ignore, and so I'm just going to vote for Trump. Great. Fantastic.
And that's what I did, and a friend encouraged me to do that. He was like, listen, I'm so tired of people that are almost like worshiping Trump to where he can do no wrong. And it's like, well, that's not good either. Like, call a spade a spade. Like, if he does something wrong, call him out on it and say, I disagree with him on this. And that's what I did. Is like, I disagreed with the way he bullied Biden in the debate, with the way he interrupted over and over, and just the way he handled all of that and other things that he's done. I'm fully against, but this carries so much weight. This is why I'm reluctantly most likely going to vote for him, because this one issue carries so much weight.
It's not even reluctant for me. I'm happy to vote for Trump at this point. Yeah. Despite my disagreements, despite what issues I have with Trump, and I've got my list of issues, it's just clear. Yeah. Like I was reluctantly or hesitatingly going to vote for Trump in the 2016 election because I wasn't sure what Trump was actually going to do. But now we have a track record, and we see his appointments, and we see how vocal he's been, and we've seen the moves he's made. That there's a balance here. Like, I definitely think there's a problem if you idolize Trump. If you think that Trump can do nothing wrong, I think you're as deranged as the camp that thinks that Trump can do nothing right. There's something wrong with both of these camps, right? At the same time, I don't think you need to apologize for voting for Trump either. No, it's clear he's the best candidate for Catholics right now. If you're not considering third party, if you're just looking at D or R's, it's just clear. So I don't think you need to make excuses or apologize. Just say, here's the thing, as we've done on this podcast. Well,
that's good. So once again, vote yes on Proposition 115 if you're in Colorado. And make sure to vote pro-life and advocate for life, because guess what? In 4 more years, unless our country completely collapses, there's going to be another election. So, and we're going to be talking about these things again, and so we're going to be judged at the end of the day by Jesus, not by Trump, not by Biden, not by other people. We're going to be judged by Jesus. And Jesus says, let the little children come to me. He identifies with the poor. Whatever you've done with the least of these, you've done to me. When Mother Teresa came to America, she said, and she works with the poorest of the poor. She said, the poorest of the poor are the children in the womb. And so think about that Jesus became one of us. He was conceived. He was an embryo at one point. When we kill those embryos, we're killing Jesus. That's weighty. And we're going to be judged by Jesus on how we act in response to this. And so, yes, value all of human life from conception to natural death. Let that judgment seat of Christ, you are going to stand before him. I'm going to stand before him. Let that soak into your mind and soul as you continue to form your conscience in light of church teaching when voting.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.